The Farbrengen is also the schus Ilan Nishmas Ilana Bas Shalom. The Mishpach was mishtatev in the choice of the Farbrengen, the schus for the Ilan Nishmas of the Neshama, and the Igaz Akit Ran Meshet Neyofa. Aye. Rabbi say, I mentioned to you before that Yebes Tammuz is the previous Rebbe's birthday, and that 47 years after he was born, he went out of jail and he was able to say Chassidus on his Yom Haledes. But there's another Yebes Tammuz that happened much earlier, when the previous Rebbe was 15 years old. I do not know how much you know about the history of the Rabbeim. Every Rebbe is every Rebbe, every Nasi has his own inyan, has his own purpose, and that purpose reflects itself in his Torah, how he lived his life. If you look at the Rabbeim, the 7 Rabbeim of Chabad, and you go back to the Baal Shem Tov, there's something about the previous Rebbe that is really different than any one of the other Rabbeim. And it's different in the kind of way that it hurts to talk about. It literally hurts to talk about. First of all, when the previous Rebbe was a child, his father was very ill. His father became a Rebbe. The Rebbe Rasha became a Rebbe when the previous Rebbe was 2 years old. 2 years old, 2 years and 2 months old, his father became a Rebbe. But for the next 10 years, 11 years, the Rebbe Rashab's Nesias was very in Asius of Das Tachten, it was inconsistent. It was not constant. There's a yon in Pnimium, there are Pnimiistic reasons why, but there's also practical reasons. Because the Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe's father, was very ill. Very, very sick. Twice, when the previous Rebbe was a child, he almost lost his father. Once when he was 7, and once when he was 11. And the previous Rebbe recalls these events in his Rishimis, and he describes his childhood as being exceedingly difficult. The Rebbe Rashab, his father, was constantly traveling for health. He traveled to warm climates, he had to see certain doctors, he had to visit mineral baths and things like this. Whenever the Rebbe Rashab traveled, he took his wife. The Rebbe Rashab always traveled with his Rebbetzin, with his wife. Which meant that if the Rebbe Rashab was away from his Lubavitch, the previous Rebbe didn't have a father or a mother. We're talking about a kid, 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old. Who raised the previous Rebbe? He cooked when his parents left for months at a time. His grandmother, the Rebbe Tzedivka, the Rebbe Rashab's mother, she was a good bubby. She was a good bubby. And there was Chassidim, Rebbe Hendel, there were certain people, but the previous Rebbe's childhood was very difficult. The previous Rebbe said in a Sikha once, publicly, that between the ages of 9 and 11, I didn't have a father. A kid. Between the ages of 9 mit 11 habe ich nicht gehabt katate. And there's a meshugan a maisa pil ploim. It's an unbelievable story. I want to get to another story, but I'll tell this story first. I was a child when I read these stories, and I knew Yiddish, but I didn't know Hebrew, and I certainly didn't know Russian. So when I'd read these stories, any word that was in Hebrew and Russian, I had to guess what it meant. Now, I could have asked my father, like any normal person, which means I know everything. So I would never ask. So we had to figure out the words that I didn't know. I had to figure out. So one of the stories is the following story. The previous Rebbe was around 11. He was in his 11th year. He was 10 and a half. And his father was so sick, he was living in the house, in the same room, same house. He hadn't seen his father in 2 months. His father was laying in bed, And his mother would not let him in to see his father, and the Tata soll sich nicht anstrengen, because if he would walk in, the Rebbe Rashab would get emotional, and it could hurt the health of the Rebbe Rashab. And it was bad. He was mamish in a crisis. It says in the Sikha, krizis. Krizis is the Yiddish word, the Russian for crisis. I never heard the word krizis. I wouldn't have known the word crisis in English when I was a kid. So I had to figure out what krizis means. But when I tell these stories, I remember my amaratzis, it's my markers of the stories. I never knew what krizis meant. What does crisis mean? His father was mamish near death, very sick. The previous Rebbe described that he had different malamdim, and now's not the time to talk about his teachers. His first malamid's name was Rabbi Kusil Malamed Dardiki. His second malamed was Rabbi Shimshon. A good malamed of Ashtrenga. He was a good teacher, but he was a mean guy. Whenever he wanted the kids to behave, he would beat the Frierdiker Rebbe. He said that I'm not afraid to hit the Rebbe's son, I'm for sure not afraid to hit you, so all the kids behave. But he was a good teacher, he says. And the third malamed was Reb Nissen Skablo, Reb Nissen. Reb Nissen was a Chassidish Yid. He says he had on the wall a belt. He never took it off the wall. The worst punishment was he would look at it and the kids knew, okay, now we got to behave. Reb Nissen Skablo disciplined his class with the promise and the threat of a story. If the kids learned well, you tell them a story. If they didn't do well, they didn't. And all the kids behaved because of his maises. Reb Nissen was a very Chassidish Yid. The previous Rebbe was in his home. And his father was very sick, and the Chassidim were gathering already. In other words, they were thinking that this is it. And he turned to his Melamed, Reb Nissen, and he said to his Melamed, what should I do? So Reb Nissen, the Melamed, was a smart man. He says, Morgen de Frisos aufstehen für Tag. Tomorrow morning, got up very early. I think it was Pasha Shmois, it was very cold, middle of winter. So it's davening with Nesh and Minyan. Start with the first minyan, 6 o'clock in the morning, as soon as you can daven. Und du start wegen auf Neil. And go to the oil of your grandfather and the great-grandfather, the Rebbe the Tzemach Tzedek and the Rebbe Marash, who are buried next to each other in Lubavitch. And you should be mispalel, daven for your father. Wenn du wirst kommen zurück, sollst du bei mir fragen und ich werde dir sagen weiter, was du sollst tun. When you'll come back, you'll come over to me and I'll tell you what to do later. But the ikid is nobody's allowed to know. Secret. So the Rebbe was all of 10 and a half. He got up very, very early. He went to the mikveh. As you say in the old country, he ran in Vaser. He went to the mikveh. He davened with the first minyan. And he walked to the oil. The oil was probably a mile from his house, a kilometer from his house. It wasn't very far. But the snow was up to his waist. So somebody helped him. I mean, I was in Lubavitch. You could see the oil from the chotzer. It's not far at all. But he walked to the oil. And near the oil there was a besmedish, there was a shtibel, a little shul. And in the shtibel there was a shamis, a man who took care of the oil, and he lived there. He lived in the shul. He saw the Frierdiker Rebbe coming. He was all of 10 and a half. He understood exactly why the previous Rebbe is coming. And he said to him, Gei Araim, go away, daven for your father. Daven. Everybody understood that this is very meaningful. So he went into his Zayd and his Alta Zayd. I don't know what a 10-year-old, but the Frierdiker Rebbe was not a 10-year-old, he was a Frierdiker Rebbe. He was mishtateach, whatever his status means, and the tzion of his Zayd and his Alta Zayd for a Meshach's man. He was home before 9 o'clock in the morning. In other words, he got up so early, and he davened so early, he was back from the oil around 9 o'clock in the morning. He walks into the house, I said Frierdiker Rebbe. And as soon as I walk into the house, I feel that there's a different mood. And then it says, the crisis is a rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe was 10 years old. He went to daven for his father. Mamish, like Elazar Rebbe Davram. Before he came home, the previous Rebbe's father was feeling better. The crisis is past. The risk to his life is past. He walked into the house. There was a lot of people around. And nobody even saw that he came, nobody saw that he left, and he went over to his Malamed Reb Nissen, and he said to his Malamed, I did exactly what he told me. I got up early, I went to the mikveh, I davened with the first minyan, I went to the oil, and I'm back. What should I do now? And he said to him, don't tell anybody what you did and you should finish the fast. You should finish the fast the whole day. This was around 9 o'clock in the morning. A little while later, somebody came out from the Rebbe Rashab, and he said to the Rebbe Rashab, from the Rebbe Rashab's room, and he said to the previous Rebbe, your father wants to see you. He hadn't seen his father in 2 months. His father was feeling better. So he walked into his father's cheder, his father's room, and his father saw him, and his father's face lit up, and he said to him, Yosef Yitzchak, was machst du, how are you? He called him always by his full name. He always called him by his full name. Yosef Yitzchak, was machst du, how are you? So he said, Baruch Hashem. And then the Rebbe said to his son, Yosef Yitzchak, hast du gegessen? Yosef Yitzchak, did you eat? Now he didn't want to tell his father that he got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and that he was fasting and that he had gone to the oil, and between me and you, that's why his son and father was feeling better. He said, but I couldn't lie to my father. The truth I didn't want to say, and a lie I couldn't say. That at that moment, when his father asked him, Yosef Yitzchak, hast du gegessen? The door opened and his mother walked in, the Rebbe Sarah. And she carried the whole stress. Her husband was ill, but she was the one who suffered. And she sees the Rebbe Rayatz. Was tut da? Why is the little boy here? Because she knew that whenever the Rebbe Rashab sees his son, it cost him emotional energy, and he didn't have the physical strength for it. Was tut da? So the Rebbe Rashab said, it's okay, I'm feeling better. It's okay, he's not going to hurt me. And she said, but you have to drink a glass of tea. So he said, okay, leges avek, put it down. Yosef Yitzchak hat mir der Langen. And Yosef Yitzchak, the Friedrich Rebbe, will give me the tea. And the Friedrich Rebbe says, and my father never asked me a second time if I ate. Mistame, he knew. He didn't ask him again. He asked him one time, Yosef Yitzchak hat gegessen. Did you eat? And the Friedrich Rebbe says, I couldn't lie to my father, but I didn't want to tell. So the Eibishter geholfen. The Hashem helped. His mother walked in. This was when he was 10 and a half, Tafresh winter. When he was bar mitzvah age, a little after bar mitzvah, the Rebbe Rashab, his father, said to his wife, and by this time the Rebbe Rashab was already officially a Rebbe and he was feeling better. I mean, my hergish is, my belief is, and people who are historians tell me that I'm imagining it, that the Rebbe Rashab's illnesses, physical illnesses, were from the stress of becoming a Rebbe. He became a Rebbe very young, the Rebbe Rashab did. He was not even 22. And he was, later in his life, he was healthier than he was earlier in his life. I think it was Inyan Pnimi, but okay, people tell me they don't know what I'm talking about. That I don't know what I'm talking about, that I know for sure. But whether they know what they're talking about, I don't know if that's true either. The Rebbe Rashab said to his wife, to the Rebbe Sarah, ich hab machel gewesen, als mit seinem CHINUCH darf ich sich allein abgeben. When it comes to the previous Rebbe's CHINUCH, I have to age myself. Because what happened was, the previous Rebbe went to Cheder like all the other kids. Probably till the age of 12. He had 3 Melamdim, Rebbe Kasil, the Melamed Ardeki, Rebbe Shimshon, and then Rebbe Nissen. At a certain point, it could be it was after Bar Mitzvah, the Rebbe Rashab hired him a private tutor to learn alone with him. The private tutor the Rebbe Rashab hired had been the Rebbe Rashab's private tutor. There was a chassid by the name of the Rashbatz, Rabbi Shmuel Betzalel Sheftel. The previous Rebbe writes his biography in the Atomim. It's translated into English. It was a big chassid. It was a big gadol. It was an Adam Gadol B'Yesed. It was a Gon and an Ovid and a chassid, a big Baal Madrege. And he had the schus to personally be madech 2 of the Lubavitcher Rebbeim. He was the Rebbe Rashab's tutor when he was a young man. And then later he was the Friedrich Rebbe's tutor. So the story goes that they slept in the same room. The Rashbatz was elderly, he didn't have a wife, and he was roommates with the Rebbe Rayatz. So the chinuch was 24 hours a day. He taught him how to prepare negel vasas, the kishur shalamita, sebeidani. He lived with him. He was madrech him in every aspect of anhoga. And the Rebbe Rayatz took a lot from the Rashbatz. He was very close to him. And at some point, the Rebbe Rashbatz, his Melamed, said to him, now we're going to learn Tanya. They learned together Gemara, they learned together Halacha. Now we're going to learn Tanya. So the Rebbe Rayatz said to his Madrich, the Rashbatz, who was, 60 years older than him. He was an old man, yeah. Tanya, I'm learning only from my father. He says, what do you mean? I'm paid. This is my job. I have to teach you everything. I have to teach you Nigla, Chassidus, Avodah. I'm sorry, Tanya, I'm learning only from my father. So the Rashbad said, but I taught your father Tanya. I taught your father Tanya. So the previous Rebbe said, what you did with my father was his business. Me? If I'm not learning from my father, I'm not learning Tanya. So the Rashbats desperately came to the Rebbe Rashab, his boss, his employer, and said, your son is being disrespectful. One kid in the class and he's managing to make trouble. He refuses to learn Tanya. So the Rebbe Rashab called the previous Rebbe and said to him, why do you learn Tanya from him? And the Rebbe didn't give an explanation. He just said, Tanya, I'm learning only from you. And if you're not teaching me Tanya, I'm not learning. So the Rebbe Rashab said, but I learned Tanya from him. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, you learned Tanya from him, that's your business, but I'm learning Tanya only from you. And it was an impasse. It took a while. The previous Rebbe insisted that Tanya is learning only from his father. So the Rebbe Rashab had to put into his schedule a time to learn Tanya with the previous Rebbe. And years later, he said to his son, Ich bin der Marke Teuve. I recognize with grace, with goodness, your insistence not to learn Tanya from anybody except from me. The Rebbe Rashab told him this. And they used to go away from the Lubavitch for long periods. They would leave right after Shavuos, and they'd come back right before Rosh Hashanah. In other words, they had mamish 3 months. Most of Sivan, Tammuz, Av, and most of Menachem, most of Elul, they would come back mamish for Slichas. And Afitzaltas Gehesen that they're going on vacation. They're going to the dacha. The dacha was about 4 miles from Lubavitch. But the real reason they would leave for such long periods of time was that Rebbe Rashab wanted to spend time with his son, and he didn't want anybody else to see. So this is the story that I wanted to tell. The minig was that they would go away to dacha. I mean, dacha was literally a few kilometers from Lubavitch. Lubavitch was a tiny little hole in the wall, and this was a hole in the closet. It was smaller than it was a shtetl. Lubavitch was a shtetl, and this was, I don't know what, a chassid had an estate with 2 houses, and the Rebbe moved into one of them. Every Monday they would come to Lubavitch. Every Monday. And when they would come to Lubavitch, the Rebbe Rashab would go into his mother, to be mechabed his mother. This is another whole conversation, but the Rebbe Rashab's kibbutz was once a week. Our Rebbe went into his mother every day. The Rebbe Rashab every Monday would go into his mother, the Rebbe Tzadivke, and she would already invite guests for like a shtickle Farbrengen, and the Rebbe Rashab would boil water, and he would bring to the table tea and cake for his mother. This was his kibbutz aveim, and he would sit with his mother for a meshech zman, half an hour, an hour, whatever it was, and they would talk. And there were other chassidim. She would invite other chassidim, elder chassidim. This was like a weekly Farbrengen. When the Rebbe Rashab was away from Lubavitch, sometimes he would travel back great distances even just to be Monday in Lubavitch to give his mother a glass of tea, and then he'd go back. So when he was in dacha, every Monday they came to Lubavitch. And they would go into the Baba, and he would serve his mother. And he would also get the mail that had come during the week. And he would also take people to Yechidus. And people came to Lubavitch for Yechidus. On Monday, every Monday he was available to meet people, and then they would leave. 1 year, Tafresh Nahei, 1895. Your base Tammuz was on Tuesday. The previous Rebbe turned 15 on Tuesday. So Monday they went to Lubavitch, and he went into his mother, the Rebbe Rashab, and the previous Rebbe obviously went along, and he poured his mother a glass of tea. They sat and fabrenged as they did every Monday. Then the Rebbe Rashab looked through the mail, and he responded to whatever letters he needed to respond to. He did his job. Pardon me. And at Sugaram Yinzi Yechidus, people who came to Lubavitch, he was available for Yechidus, and they left. The same day, Monday, they left. That night, the previous Rebbe's father, the Rebbe Rashab, calls in the previous Rebbe. He says, tomorrow morning, you should get up very early. You should daven with the first minyan as soon as you can daven, because we're going back to Lubavitch. It was his birthday, his 15th birthday. And the previous Rebbe said, we were in Lubavitch yesterday. He said, I know, we're going back again. So the previous Rebbe said to his father, the Rebbe Rashab, the Bobbe wird sich schrecken. Grandma is going to be afraid. When your mother is going to see that we came back a day after a day, it's going to tell her that something is not good. So the Rebbe Rashab said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, Sie weiß schon von dem. She already knows that we're coming back, don't worry. And it was the 15th birthday of the Rebbe Rashab. 15th birthday, he was 15 years old. And you have to bear in mind that the first 15 years of his life was also not a bowl of cherries. It was a very hard life. It was not an easy childhood. They came to Lubavitch on Tuesday. They went to his mother. There was brachas, nalazachan, and they went to the oil. They went to the oil. The Rebbe Rashab and the previous Rebbe went to the oil. If I'm not mistaken, I didn't look up the Rishima now, so I cannot tell you with precise accuracy. The Rebbe Rashab went in first, and he spoke to his father and his grandfather. Then he called in the previous Rebbe, and there were some incredibly intense moments. It was a very serious event. The Frierdiker was 15, and the Rebbe Rashab said to his 15-year-old son, "Ich nehm dir zu der Akaida." You understand the Chumash? Avraham Avinu took his son to the Akaida to sacrifice him. So the Rebbe Rashab said to his 15-year-old son, "Ich nehm dir zu an Akaida." I'm taking you to Akaida. I'm tying you like Avraham Avinu tied Yitzchak. And he said to him, "I decided that going forward, all matters of public service that I'm involved with, you are going to be my right hand." 15 years old. And he said to him, to be a servant of the Jewish people, the way a servant of the Jewish people is supposed to be, you have to have complete self-sacrifice. And then the Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe's father, said to the previous Rebbe, "Du weißt was meint Mesiras Nefesh? Do you understand what Mesiras Nefesh means? Do you understand what it means to be prepared to sacrifice everything for a principle, for the Ikir?" So the previous Rebbe understood that the right answer was no. Understood that the right answer was no. So the Rebbe Rashab said to him, "Mesiras Nefesh meint azoi und nicht anders." Mesiras Nefesh means it has to be this way and no other way. There's no room for compromise. And at the age of 15, the Rebbe Rashab basically stole the Frierdiker Rebbe's life from him. It wasn't like the first 15 years were exactly so much fun, but from that moment forward, the previous Rebbe served 25 years. He was his father's right hand. The Frierdiker Rebbe says, "I used to write letters in my father's handwriting, and he would sign. And you could not tell which was mine and which was his." He says, "I would write letters in my father's handwriting to the Gedolei Yisrael in Russia, and my father would sign his name, but you couldn't see which was his handwriting, which was my handwriting." Derech Agav, there's a Meshuggah Maise, a Maise Piliploim, a Meirindik Maise, an unbelievable story. The Rebbe Rashab, this is a whole part. Frierdiker Rebbe was very into diktuk and loshen and ksav. As a child, it was very important to him to write correctly and beautifully. He argued with his father. His father got him a private tutor to teach him how to write. See, he says he was once in his father's room. There's a cheder of Sfarim that had several rooms that had books. And there was a maimer from the Rebbe Marash. A maimer from the Frierdiker Rebbe's grandfather, from the Rebbe Rashab's father. And the maimer was unfinished. The Rebbe Marash started to write a maimer, b'ksav yad kodesh, and he didn't finish it. So the Frierdiker Rebbe read the maimer, and he saw what was missing. He took a piece of paper, and in the Rebbe Marash's handwriting, he wrote the end of the maimer. He was a very young man, and he was thinking that when he's finished, he'll take it with him and leave. And he forgot it. He forgot it. The next day, his father is exhilarated. His father is so happy. He never saw his father so happy. I have today an unbelievable joy. I found a maimer of my father that I never saw before. And the Frierdiker Rebbe get a trezel. He fooled his father. But you know what it means to fool his father? He couldn't imitate the handwriting. He had to imitate the Torah of the Rebbe Marash. In other words, it wasn't just nice words. It was Torah that the Rebbe Rashab thought that his father wrote it. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says, I was in so much pain. I deceived my father about something like this. He says, for 3 days I walked around Oismensch, and I finally went into my father, and with tears in my eyes, I told him, I wrote it. I'm sorry that I fooled you. I meant to take it when I finished, and I left it. And the Rebbe Rashab got a kick out of it. He wasn't very upset. Nish gefällt. Nish kosher, he said. Nish kosher. Not so bad. Okay. If you could fool me like this, that's actually a different bracha. The point of this whole thing is, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, at the age of 15, no longer was a private citizen. For 25 years, he served as the right hand of his father. There's a tape, there's actually a tape, where you can hear the Rebbe saying this. In the early years, maybe it's a Chavdala Tevis. When the Rebbe became Rebbe, he was 49 years old. But he looked like he was 25, you understand? And the Rebbe pushed himself. The Rebbe worked harder than any Rebbe. Our Rebbe, day and night. He would sit with people all night long. And the elder Chassidim felt that they have to make sure that the Rebbe watches his health. So every once in a while, someone tried to tell the Rebbe to chill, to take it easy, you know. If you ever tried to tell the Rebbe, take it easy, the Rebbe would feed you back your words, you know, like ufsin. You know? He'd put a pipe and pour it down your throat, you know what I'm saying? So there's actually, you can hear the Rebbe, someone says something to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe says to him, Willst du benehmen im Schwer? You understand Yiddish? You want the job. You want you want to take over the Frierdiker Rebbe? You want the job? You don't want the job. So sit quiet. You know? You can actually hear the Rebbe saying it on an audio tape. Willst du benehmen im Schwer? And then I think in that conjunction there's a Sadar Maise. The Rebbe tells this chassid, who was obviously much older than he was, Sadar Maise mitten Schwer. And then the Rebbe says, you know what, I'll wait till it gets quiet and I'll tell the story to everybody. So when it got quiet, the Rebbe told the following story. That once, the Rebbe Rashab, there was a meeting of Rabbonim in Russia. But when you say a meeting of Rabbonim in Russia, you're talking about Gedei Yisrael, you're talking about Reb Chaim Brisker, the Chofetz Chaim, Mamish Gedei Yisrael meeting, giants. And the Rebbe Rashab could not go to the meeting, so he sent the previous Rebbe. He was 16. He was 16 years old. It didn't look good. The Rebbe Rashab didn't have a beard yet. He can sit with Gedei Yisrael. So he sent along the Rashbatz, his tutor. The Rashbatz had a long white beard, so the Rebbe Rashbatz was the shliach, and the Rashbatz was the beard. So the Rebbe tells the story by Farbrengen. He says, right before they left, he called in the Rashbatz, and he said to the Rashbatz, "Du sollst wissen, as ich schick em. I want you to know that I'm sending him, not you. You're the beard. Und was weniger de sich mischen als besser. And the less you get involved in the proceedings, the better it'll be. Keep your mouth shut. You're the white beard, you're the old man, I'm sending him." Verstehst? This is the story of the Frierdiker Rebbe's life. If you study his life, it aches how hard it was. It aches. I mean, if you know anything about the previous Rebbe, if you look at his picture, if you read his writing, you're never going to find a man with more tikva, with more hope, with more betachon, more optimism. His life was miserably hard. He never had an easy day. His life was so hard, but he was unbreakable. The Rebbe Rayatz's spirit, the Frierdiker Rebbe's spirit, he endured Shiva Medur Gehenim, Shiva Pa'amim, like it says in the Bechokesei, Shiva Pa'amim Shiva. His life was so difficult. Everything that he did, not only was hard, it wasn't even rewarded. You know, the Rebbe said to people, my father-in-law put in all the work and I'm reaping the reward. The Rebbe told this to people, in other words. His life was so hard. And it didn't start when he became a Rebbe at the age of 40. As a young man, his father made him a public servant. At 15. On Yud Beis Tammuz. Now, again, if you study the biographies, you'll come away with a big kasha. The Rebbe Rashab, his father, took his time becoming a Rebbe. Took his time. He waited till he was like 33 or 34, 33, 32, 33. And his own son, at 15, he throws him into the furnace. There's actually a story once. They were working on in 1905, there was a war between Russia and Japan. And the Rebbe Rashab put himself into providing the Jewish service people with matzah and other things. Anyway, it came Elul, and they were very busy with those activities. And the Rebbe Rashab says to Frierdiker Rebbe, as soon as Rosh Hashanah, I got to stop this activity. You do it, I got to pay for Rosh Hashanah. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says to his father, and what am I, chopped liver? But I don't have Rosh Hashanah. Only you have Rosh Hashanah. So the Rebbe Rashab said to his son, I'll take you on my wagon. You do what you have to, wherever I go, I'll take you with me. I'll take you on my wagon. The Rebbe Rashab. So the kasha is, why the Rebbe Rashab did things for his own son that he didn't do for himself, in terms of Askonos Tiburis. And I don't know this for a fact, it doesn't say any place. But it's a code of Levada, it's very reasonable to assume that the Rebbe Rashab knew what the previous Rebbe's generation was going to look like. And he needed all the training he could get. In other words, the Rebbe Rashab deprived his son, the previous Rebbe, of older Rebbe. What did they do? They sat and learned. What do you think the Rebbe Rashab did when the Rebbe Marash was Rebbe? He learned Torah day and night. They were completely removed from the world. They were involved in Torah v'Avodah. They were involved in holiness. They were connecting to Atzmos and Baruch Hu. The previous Rebbe was really almost never given that opportunity. So again, I don't know this. I can't tell this as a fact, but it's very reasonable to assume that the Rebbe Rashab understood what kind of Messias the previous Rebbe would have, and he was pashut. He was rearing him at the heart of it. He was rearing him. He was raising him for Mesiras Nefesh, for the idea of in context. The right word is principle. What's the difference between a principled person and a mishuganer? I'm asking you a question. Honestly, what's the difference between a retard, I'm a nut, a stubborn idiot, and a principled person? The answer to that question is principle. What's principle? What's ikaram? What is principle? If you learn Torah, you learn Rambam, you learn Chazal, there's a word. Words are very, very important. And the word is ikir. What is the English translation of the word ikir? But before you answer, we use the word ikir as the denotation for God. Kafar ba'ikir. When the Rambam wants to talk about Hashem in an unqualified, in an unformed way, he uses the word ikir. Ikir means principle. Ikir means principle. Having the right ikir means having... You know what the meaning of principle is? Principle means having a sense of truth that is entirely intuitive. It's entirely feel. You can't argue it. You can't defend it. You can't prove it. You just know it. That's ikir. Anybody can have a shaila and look at Shulchan Aruch and paskin. But nit alle steht in Shulchan Aruch. Not everything is written, and sometimes you don't follow Shulchan Aruch. There's a story that I heard this when my father-in-law passed away. So during Shiva, someone told this Maisa in the name of Reb Nissen. My father-in-law's name was Moshe Nemenov. His father was Reb Nissen, the Mashpia. That Reb Nissen was in Leningrad. Reb Nissen, the great chassid, Reb Nissen was in Leningrad the year that Rebbe was arrested. Frierdiker was arrested, 1927. And the Rebbe knew, the previous Rebbe knew that they're going to arrest him. It was only a question of when. Because he had pushed the envelope. If you know the history, there was a meeting of Rabbonim the summer before, so the Rebbe Rayatz made his own meeting of Rabbonim. He defied the government. He dared the Soviets. He dared them. He made a meeting in Kazakhstan. The Rebbe Rayatz was literally, the right language is on a suicide mission. He had no intention of surviving. Yud Beis Tammuz is a Yom Tov because God did it. The Frierdiker Rebbe did nothing to save himself. Nothing. And the Rebbe knew that he's going to be taken. It was only a question of when. So the story was, I heard this about 12 years ago, that a while before the previous Rebbe was arrested, he called an our Rebbe. The Rebbe's Ogazuz, an our Rebbe, who was a bocher, he was a chasam. In 1927, the Rebbe was 25. 24, 25. And he said to his future son-in-law, that in case I'm arrested, and I'm sitting in a cell, and there's more than one person in the cell, and they also had a latrine. They didn't exactly have a bathroom, you understand? They had a bucket. How must one behave under those conditions as far as gufnaki and putting on tefillin and davening? He asked him a shayla aloch. And he said to our Rebbe, this is the story that I heard, "Di shayla is mid nish negir l'maisa." For me, this is not a practical question. Because I am going to be moishe nefesh v'koytes shayud. I am going to sacrifice myself not to compromise anything. In other words, I'm not going to make any kind of say, under these conditions you can do this, under these conditions, I'm not going to settle for any conditions. Listen to the Lashon. He said to our Rebbe, I want to see how a Hasidic Rav thinks. A Rav looks at Shulchan Aruch and Paskins. But when it comes to it, there's no halachas of Mesiras Nefesh. In Russia, when you have to be Mesa Nefesh, the difference between principle and Mishagas is a hair. So how do you know if you're a Meshuggah or if you're a Mesiras Nefesh? There's only one answer to that question. If you're a person of principle, you have principle. If you're a person, forgive me for saying this, a flab, flab means an extra layer, a spare tire, as they say, you have no shaykhs to principle. Principle means to know what the right thing to do when there is no judgment, logical judgment, not reasonable, not even halachic. This comes from the viscera. This comes from the etzem. Ikaram, principle. And the Frierdiker Rebbe was raised to develop this chush, to have this intuition, this sense of when you have to have Mesiras Nefesh, and how you have to have Mesiras Nefesh, and the extent to which the Mesiras Nefesh goes. And in the words of his father, Azeyu nit andesh, this way and no other way. It has to be exactly like this. Rabbi say, what I just said, I don't understand. I don't understand what I'm saying. But this is the truth. If you want to understand Bechlal, a Rebbe, if you want to understand the previous Rebbe and the Inyan Mesiras Nefesh, Shas Hashmad, there's a sefer called Sefer HaChinuch, written from the Rishonim. And the Sefer HaChinuch has the Tayag Mitzvahs. And one of the Tayag Mitzvahs is Mesiras Nefesh. This is the Akaida Hashem, yeah? In Pashas Emer. Mesiras Nefesh has rules, you know that? Mesiras Nefesh has rules. The Rambam brings 5 madrigas. The Rambam has a letter which is called the Yeres Hashmad, and he's brought to Hilchos Seder Torah also. He has 5 levels of Mesiras Nefesh. If it's B'Yachid, if it's B'Parhesya, if it's a Tiyavin, if it's Lahaches, there are rules. And then the Sefer HaChinuch writes, then you have Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was Mesa Nefesh to teach children Torah. And they murdered him, B'Payah, in the most cruel way. And which category of Mesiras Nefesh was Rabbi Akiva's? The first category, the second category, the third category, the fourth category, the fifth category. I'm embellishing a little bit, but this is what it says in the Nekuda. The answer is, says in Sefer HaChinuch, that Gedei Yisrael like Rabbi Akiva have principle. And they know when you don't look in Shulchan Aruch. They know when you do what your neshama says and you don't say, what does it say in Torah? This is really the story of the previous Rebbe's entire life. This was a man who had judgment, who made decisions, And on the basis of his judgment, and on the basis of his decision, he sent his chassidim into fire. He sent his chassidim into fire. Because his judgment was so strong. His judgment was so correct. His judgment was in his own mind so trustworthy that if he knew, whether he understood it or he didn't understand that this was right, he trusted his judgment to the extent that he can send somebody else into Mesiras Nefesh because he knows that he's not making a mistake. This is what the Rebbe is. Rabbi say we live in America. We rarely face these kinds of questions. Our biggest shayla is Yaskarov. And you have to know what you're off to ask. But the truth of the matter is, Yiddishkeit was, is, and always will be principle. Principle means there's an akudeh, there's a point of truth, which is the foundation of who we are. It's the foundation of how we live. And if I may say so, it's the foundation of how we raise our children. And that's the most important thing. That is beyond what you can find in any book. It's beyond what you could justify and explain and prove based on any theory. It's deeper and it's truer and it's more absolute than anything written even in Chochmas HaTorah. This is what the Rebbe gives us, what the Rabbeim give us. This is something very, very deep and something very, very, very important. And it really is in Tammuz. The Friedrich Rebbe, I don't know what to tell you. Did you ever study his life? His life was miserable. There's nothing else to say. There's letters from the Friedrich Rebbe, private letters, where he's explaining how much pain he has in his life. But that's not the point. He was constantly facing questions that were so good a lead. They were so faithful. They were so important that he didn't have anybody or anything to look to except to who he was. This was a human being. He was a torch of Mesiras Nefesh. He himself was a torch of Mesiras Nefesh. He was a burning ember, and his emes was the basis of the judgments that he made, and his emes is the base of the judgment that he waits, and in a very, very real way, it is the reason we're sitting here today, all these years later, because he had this clarity and this principle. I'm giving you a dumb example, but for many people it's not a dumb example, right? You raising your children, and you never chalabavitcher. So the Rebbe whispers in your ear, you don't need limudei chol, you don't need limudei chol, and you're whispering back, yeah, but I wanted to make a lot of money, I wanted to live a comfortable life, and the Rebbe's whispering back. What's he whispering back? What's he whispering back? He'll make a lot of money. Or what's more important, that he should make a lot of money or should be a yid? What's more important, that he should make a lot of money and be a yid, or he should make less money and be a yid and his child should be a yid? All of us know that voice, and we know the whole conversation, but we block out the part of it that we don't like, and we blame it on everybody else. We can't blame it on the Rebbe. You don't want to mess with the Rebbe, not only because you're afraid they're going to stone you in shul, but because you know that this is truth. This is so deep. This is so deep. It's so so core. It's so ikir. It's so ikir. And it's who Yidnar. It's who Chassidim are. It's the reason Jewish people exist. It's not because we're so smart, not because we're so resourceful, but because we know where the line is. We know where Mesiras Nefesh has to be. And this is a test. I mean, this is Yebes Tammuz. I'm talking about the previous Rebbe. But this is all of us. This is all of us. This is all of our lives. So when you talk about the story, I want to stop now, okay? I'll tell you one story and then I give you a pledge that unless I come up with another story that's worthwhile, I will make a break. It's a gewaldike mais. It's a moidendike mais. There was a Yid by the name of Harav Pinchas Hirschsprung, Rabbi Hirschsprung, Zechayna Lebracha. When the Rebbe met him, the Rebbe said to him, Shmoi hoylech meseifer elam vat seifer. The Rebbe told him those words. Your name is going from one end of the next. You know the Gemara, this is said about Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Kiva met one of the great sages who was Meirach Yomim from the time of the Zugis. Knew what was his name? Ben Aftinas. What was his name? I guess I know him. There was a Taneh that was much older. He's from the, according to the Rambam, he was from the Zugis. He met Rabbi Kiva and two of his friends. And when he saw Rabbi Kiva, he said, Shmoi ha'ilach v'seifei v'seifei. So the previous Rebbe said this, the Rebbe of Gesundsein said this to Rabbi Hirschsprung when he met him the first time in Yechidus. They had a very interesting relationship. He would sit behind the Rebbe with complete bittul. He knew the whole Torah by heart. He knew the whole Torah by heart. Bavli and Yerushalmi with the Rishonim by heart. And he would sit behind the Rebbe. We could have had more respect for him, trust me. But Rabbi Hirschsprung had a story that he told. In 1966, almost 60 years ago, it was about 10 years since the revolution in Romania. I mean, after the Second World War, the Warsaw Pact was not complete. In the beginning, there were countries that were more leaning towards the West. Czechoslovakia was leaning towards the West. I think even Poland was leaning towards the West. But for sure, Romania. Then there were revolutions. Hungary. All these revolutions were instigated from the Soviet Union, and they became communist. They became one-party rule. So in 1956, there was a big revolution in Romania, and this couple, Ceausescu, ruled from 1956 till, I don't know what, 1989, with an iron fist. Huh? No, Romania. Romania. 56 was a few countries. It was in Prague also, it was in Czechoslovakia, it was in Romania. A kid said, 10 years later, they decided, it was a very, very tough dictatorship. They were very cruel. They held the country with an iron fist. That they would bring a delegation of rabbis from America to prove that there's freedom of religion in Romania. And they invited many Rabbanim. Amongst the people they sent invitations to was this Rabbi Hirschsprung. He lived in Montreal. He came to New York, and he went into the Rebbe, and he asked the Rebbe if he should go. And the Rebbe said, absolutely, he should go. You know how it is. You brought a pair of film every day. 12 days, 12 pairs of film, and you left every day a pair of film in shul. So somebody else had a pair of film, as if it was a gefit. You brought 12 pairs of film, every day you left one pair in shul. And somebody found it, and somebody benefited from it. But the Rebbe told him, you should know that every single move you make is being watched. The Gabbai of the shul, the younger man, the Yiddish person who is going to be your chaperone, is an agent of the state. And appreciate this, that if you talk to the locals, nothing is going to happen to you. But the day you leave the country, they go to jail. So you have to be very, very careful. And the Rebbe impressed upon him how serious this is. And there's many stories like this as well, which is another thing. A kid said he went. And the Rebbe said, of course, when you come back, I want to see you. When people used to come back from the Eastern Bloc, the Rebbe used to cross-examine them like he was a member of the CIA. And the Rebbe would ask many questions, but he would never give you information. He would lead you to what he wanted to hear about, but he never let you know what he knows, because if you don't know something, he wasn't going to give you information you didn't have. David Moshe? Look at you. Shalom Aleichem, l'chaim v'levracha. It's nice to see you. You know what kind of miracles that you remember your name. I don't remember anybody's names. Thank you for coming. I hope I'm not embarrassing you too much. I love you. God knows I love you. L'chaim. 1 second. Here's the Maisa. They went to Romania. They visited many places, and everything was chaperoned. The whole thing was choreographed. Wherever they went, they made sure that there was yeshivas. The whole thing was a bluff. But occasionally there was a lapse, and he was able to have a real conversation with a local. They came to a certain city, and he met a Hasidic Yid, Pashat. Mit Peyes and a board. Mistami didn't have a shtreimel, Mr. Work kasket. His wife was like the derech of Hasid Ungarin. She was wearing a sheitel, and top of a sheitel she had a hat. They were tanua. His children looked like they were raised in Yerushalayim. Mit Payalach, Yiddische Kinder. Mit tzitzes. Really Chassidish kids. And they were surrounded by a desert. There was nobody else. When this Rabbi Hirschsprung came to this person's, to this shtetl, this man found a minute when the Gabbai had turned his back. And he tells him like this. He said, I live here all by myself. I have no chaverim. I have no mishpacha. I'm all alone. And I'm young. I'm not an old man. I have a wife and kids. And for the last 10 years in this city, I'm everything. Cradle to the grave. I do the bris, I do the shalom zachet, I do the upshen, I do the bar mitzvah, I do the chasna, lahavdal, elf havdals, I'm inside to get pturin, and I bury people. Everything Jewish is me. But, like Yankov Avinu said, Mosai eseg hamanoichi lebeis, I have children. My children have no friends. My children have no school. They have no prospect. I keep them locked in the house. I think I've paid my dues. I need to get out. And he tells him, there's one man in the world who can get me out of Romania, and this is the Lubavitcher Rebbe. How he knew of the Rebbe, nobody knows. How he knew that the Rebbe could help him, for sure, nobody knows. He says, you need to go back to America, go into the Lubavitcher Rebbe, tell him about me, and tell him that I did my service. I did my service. Chagitsot, I paid blood. But the Rebbe has to get me out, because I want to raise Yiddish kinder, Chassidish kinder. It was unbelievably moving. Rabbi Hirschman came back to Canada. He came to see the Rebbe. The Yechidus for hours. The Rebbe used to ask every question about every person. And after the Rebbe finished with all of his cross-examinations, now Rabbi Hirschman had an opportunity to raise issues that people had shared with him that the Rebbe, for the Rebbe. And he told them the story. That he met a Yid in Romania. A Chassidish Yid. Mit Peyes, mit a board. Again, not in the Chabad Seder, but the Ungarische, very, very, very precise in the levush that they have. Him and his wife and his children. And he says, this man told me that I should share with you that for the last 10 years since the revolution, he has been the Ruach HaChaim of this community, and he feels like he has a right now to leave because he has to have his own children, should have nachas, and that only the Rebbe can help him. The Rebbe has to get him out of Romania. So Rabbi Hirschsprung tells this to the Rebbe. Now, you have to understand, in 1966, the Rebbe and Rabbi Hirschsprung had already a standing relationship. They had met many times, and they talked in learning. There's a lot of stories. When he tells this to Rabbi Hirschsprung, the Rebbe pauses. 1966, Tov Shin Chavov. The Rebbe pauses, and he becomes very, very thoughtful. And then he looks up at Rabbi Hirschsprung, and he tells him these words. He said in Yiddish, if he's going to leave, who's going to do the bris? If he is going to leave, who is going to prepare the boy for bar mitzvah? Who is going to prepare a kale? Zu wissen, wie der Rätsel war Chasana, Yiddische Chasana. Who is going to prepare a chasan? How a Yiddish couple lives. And the Rebbe says to him, Rabbi Hirschsprung, the Rebbe der Schwerf like schicken Menschen in azelche Erter. My father-in-law would send people into such places. Now bracket, this is me speaking now. I don't send people to such places. End the bracket. Aber wie kannst du bei mir beten, als ich soll helfen nach Reus gehen? Which means English, how could you even ask? How could you even ask that I should help him leave? He says the previous Rebbe sent people into such environments. Wie kannst du bei mir beten? Rabbi Hirschsprung was a Gadol B'Yisrael. He was a giant of Torah. And Rabbi Hirschsprung stood in front of the Rebbe and he listened to the Rebbe say this. He walked out of that Yechidus and he said to people, I never met the Lubavitcher Rebbe till right now. I never met him. I met a Gadol B'Yisrael, I met a Talmud Chacham, I met a Rosh Yeshiva Lamden. He says, now I know the burden that he carries, the judgment. You can't look in a sefer to answer such a question, to make such a decision. Only one place to look, it's here. But to be here, to make such a decision, has to be so pure, has to be so purged, has to be so mitzurif, mavurah, and mezuchach. There's not allowed to be any mitzias whatsoever except Ratzon Elyon. This is how Gedalis on the Rabbeim make decisions. This is how the Rebbe sends people on shlichus. And this is the Frierdiker Rebbe's entire life. Entire life. Now I promise you that after I tell the story, I'm going to stop to speak. But this speaks for itself. We are little people, but we're mekusha to Rabbeinu Neseinu, we're mekusha to the Rebbe. This hashkafa, this shita, we have different words for it. We call it the nekuda, the pintele, the point, where truth is and must be ner leraglenu. That's how we decide how we live our life. That's how we decide how we get married. That's how we decide how we have children. That's how we decide how we raise our children. Does it make sense? It doesn't have to. It has to be right. And this is what Yud Beis Tammuz is. This is not, it's not a story by Yom Heim Manazes Amol Getroffen that happened a long time ago. Yud Beis Tammuz is a celebration, is a commemoration, is an experience of Mesiras Nefesh that's now. And Baruch Hashem, we're living in Atzas Arvocha. We're living in a different kind of environment. But the idea of principle is in a way harder for us to find than it was when you lived in a world that was black and white. My grandfather, my wife's grandfather, Jason, the Motcha Schusterman, Zaydi Schusterman, I married his granddaughter before he passed away and had opportunity to meet him. So he told us that when they were leaving Russia, he was on the same trade with Reb Nemenov. When they left Russia, they called Eshalonen. They were literally sent out of Russia in cattle cars. They sat on the floor. And as they crossed the border from Russia into Poland, Reb Nissen said, Reb Nissen was a big chassid. He was talking about big chassid. He said, light, Shimon Rabbi, I want you to listen. He says, we are coming from an Eilam HaEmes, and we're going into an Eilam HaSheker. We are coming from a world of truth, that for Shmira Shabbos you pay 5 years in Siberia. And for Chinuch Kinderlach you pay 10 years. And for Mikvah Tale you pay 3 years. And we're going into a place where for Chinuch Yiddish Kinderlach people can tell you, you're a nice guy, thank you. For wanting a kosher mikveh, you're going to tell you you're a wonderful Yid. And the challenge becomes, in this new world, where is going to be our principle? Rabbi say, I don't like to give guilt trips. And why? Because if I give a guilt trip, all I got to do is look in the mirror. I hate what I see. I don't know about you, but I don't know what you see, but I see in the mirror I don't like. But the emes is, this is Yud Beis Tammuz. It's now, and it's us, and it's here, and it's today. So the Rebbe should mention Yadayim, for Hashem should give us all the clarity and the principle and the iskashnos. What we need is to be connected to the Rebbe, but it's so easy to say that our judgments should be like his judgments, and we should do it mitoich simcha. The fact that to be a Yid and a Chassid defies Elam Hazeh, goes against what the world says. The fact that to be a Yid and a Chassid creates questions that we can't necessarily answer and explain and justify. Are nisyonis, they're tests, but they're not true. And Hashem should give us koiches that we should be Chassidische Yidden, and we should raise Chassidische Kinderlach. If we have Chassidische children, then we know for sure we're Chassidische Yidden. And if we don't have Chassidische Kinderlach, then we're Chassidische Yidden with nisyonis. So the Eibush to help them, aber so schauen kein nisyonis, was haben nur Atzloche. L'chaim. Rabbi say, I want to say that before we stop. Before you go, everybody is now gathered. Lama zogen them out in the Rebbe's niggin. Sit back down. We'll see the Alter Rebbe's niggin, and then you can go home.